Palestinians in Gaza are subjected to relentless bombing wherever they go.
That was the voice of attorney Adila Hassim. She's representing South Africa at the International Court of Justice at The Hague. And she was speaking last Thursday where her client has presented a case of genocide against the state of Israel over Israel's actions in Gaza.
They are killed in their homes, in places where they seek shelter, in hospitals, in schools, in mosques, in churches, and as they try to find food and water for their families. They have been killed if they failed to evacuate in the places to which they have fled, and even while they attempted to flee along Israeli-declared safe routes. In the first 3 weeks alone, following 7 October, Israel deployed 6,000 bombs per week. At least 200 times it has deployed 2,000-pound bombs in southern areas of Palestine designated as safe. These bombs have also decimated the north, including refugee camps.
The combined power of the 200 bombs containing 2,000 pounds of explosive power she referenced totals 10 times the explosive power of the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined in World War II. Hassim also referenced the conditions facing Gaza's 2.5 million people at this moment.
Of all the people in the world currently suffering catastrophic hunger, more than 80% are in Gaza.
Dan Kovalik is an American human rights lawyer and peace activist. He's also an author and teaches international human rights law at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. We spoke with him via Skype on Monday. So, Dan, you heard that. You've been paying attention to this case and you're writing about it, so talk to me.
First of all, if we look at the numbers of Palestinians killed in Gaza by Israel since October 7th, the figures that I've seen are over 30,000 Palestinians killed. Of those, over 28,000 are civilian. If you do the percentages, that means 92% of the Palestinians killed by Israel are civilian. And if you do the percentage of women and children, 58% of the total of all the Palestinians killed are women and children. What this shows is there is no military rationale behind what Israel's doing. This is an attempt, and I'm going to start quoting the Genocide Convention of 1948. This is an attempt to destroy, in whole or in part, the ethnic national group known as Palestinians. That is what is clear. And when you combine those numbers with the fact that they've destroyed a significant proportion of the hospitals, actually they've destroyed 70% of the civilian infrastructure of Gaza. They've murdered hundreds of doctors. They've murdered, I don't know the full figure now, but well over 100 journalists, more journalists than were killed in World War II. And you combine all those things with cutting off water and food and medicine to the people of Gaza since October 7th. Now, well over half the population, I think much more than half, is suffering from famine levels of hunger. And that's done by intention. And you combine that with all the statements that numerous Israeli officials have made about the people of Gaza, that they're animals, or that Gaza just needs to be leveled or wiped out or nuked. All these things combined show this is a genocide. This is an attempt to destroy the Palestinian people as a people, and that is genocide. In fact, as a number of people have said, this is probably the best documented case of genocide ever since the Holocaust.
It's an interesting fact, given that what the media here keeps invoking is that the attack on October 7th was the largest killing of Jews since the Holocaust. And they're comparing it to, they've referred to it as another Jewish Holocaust. And we're talking numbers at least one order of magnitude below what has been imposed in reprisal.
Well, let me, in fact, go over those numbers for you, Don, because I have those in front of me, too. Numbers I've seen are that 1,139 Israelis were killed on October 7th, 1,139. Of those, 695 were civilians. 373 were official security forces. And I say official because that just means they're official police or military. That wouldn't even count armed settlers, for example.
Right.
Who might be military targets.
Who are illegally occupying Palestinian land, actually, let's be clear about it. And that's why they're armed.
Right.
That's armed, yeah.
But we're not even counting those. So if you don't even count those, if you just count official security forces, a third of the people killed by the militants on October 7th were military people. A third, 1/3, compared to 8% of military people killed by Israel. It's not even close. And by the way, that doesn't even tell the whole tale, because we now know that of all those 1,139 people killed on October 7th, an untold number were killed by Israeli forces themselves. We know that now, right? So that would lower the percentage of civilians killed by militants that day. We also know, by the way, that what happened on October 7th was the militants breached the fence, the concentration camp fence, we should say, of Gaza, and a number of Palestinian civilians entered with them on their own and carried out random acts of violence. So if you don't attribute those numbers of people killed to the militants, you really, the percentage of security forces to civilians is rather, significant and high. So to call that a Holocaust really is not appropriate. The Holocaust that is happening is against the people of Gaza. And in fact, the numbers of children killed per day in Gaza by the Israelis is more than the number of children killed per day during the Holocaust.
Let that sink in for a minute. Okay. In fact, why don't you repeat that?
The rate of children being killed in Gaza per day is greater than the rate of children that were killed during the Holocaust by the Nazis.
Okay. And now what we're talking about also is, on the one hand, this fighting is taking place on land that is being illegally occupied by Israel, that belongs to the people who are caged in Gaza. That thing we played earlier about starvation, who were living in that condition already because of Israel imposing since, was it 2006? That condition has been building for 15 years, more than 15 years, for people living inside Gaza. And what happened was they exploded over the barbed wire and walls that walled them into this small piece of property the size of Manhattan, with a population the size of Manhattan, and no food, water, or energy, or construction materials or anything else are allowed in and out without going through 2 Israeli checkpoints. They exploded past that wall, and there were people illegally occupying their land. That's what happened on October 7th.
Yes, and we have to remember also that, while the militants took hostages on October 7th, something like 200 and some, let's just say just under 250. At the time that they did that, there were 5,000 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli custody, and many of those so-called prisoners were really hostages, right? Because a lot of them were children, a lot of them were women, a lot of them were people in administrative detention, meaning no charges were brought against them. And the goal of the militants was to take hostages so that they could get those people back. And by the way, after October 7th, what Israel did is, while they gave up 150 of these so-called prisoners, or hostages, as you may like, back to the Palestinians, Israel took over 3,000 more people hostage after October.
That's right.
And this comparison of Gaza to a concentration camp or to the Warsaw Ghetto, if you would like, is totally apt. The fact that they had to break through a fence to begin with tells you everything you need to know. These folks have been treated like prisoners since 2007.
Very briefly, give us a quick outline of the case and where you think it's headed.
Well, I think, the figures I gave you and the statements that Israelis have made that I mentioned are the crux of the case. I mean, it's very clear here's the thing. Israel's been very clear about what it was going to do and what it's doing, right? And that's part of how you prove genocide. You have to, you prove there was a plan to wipe out the population. Again, in whole or in part. You don't have to wipe out the whole population. I mean, at this point, if I'm correct, I think it's 4% killed or seriously injured. And then, again, you combine it with these statements and with this plan that was leaked, that they wanted to just push all the people of Gaza, all 2.3 million, into the desert. In Egypt, all those things are being discussed and brought forward. This is a textbook case of genocide, and I'm not the only one saying that. Israel has no defense to this. I believe that South Africa will win this case. And of course, what that also means, so Israel will be found guilty of genocide. That also means that the U.S. is guilty of aiding and abetting genocide under the Genocide Convention. Now, what will be done in response to that, I don't know. But what I do believe it will be the most important, and I've taught international human rights law at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law for 11 years. I wrote a textbook on human rights law, and I can tell you this will be the most important international law case ever decided, probably since the Nuremberg decision. And it will be significant because, while the U.S. and the West are always crying genocide to justify their military operations, it will be the U.S. and Israel that are found guilty of genocide and with merit. And it will destroy, the West's halo effect that it has, that it is the somehow righteous force in the world against the axis of evil, when in fact the West, it will turn out, has been the axis of evil all along.
Dan, thank you very much for your time and your expertise, and we'll speak with you again soon.
Thank you, Don.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.